Jai Hind बच्चों. Today we will do one more topic of chapter 6 of class 10th, that is respiration in terrestrial organisms. Right? So we know that these terrestrial organisms, they use oxygen. Right? And to absorb this oxygen, they have different organs. Right? So different organisms have different organs to absorb this oxygen. Okay? And what are the basis means what are the requirement or what are the different qualities of that particular organ is, first of all, the main purpose of these organs are to increase the surface area, okay, so that more and more gaseous exchange can take place, more oxygen can absorb, more of the carbon dioxide can release. Okay. So these organs, they increase the surface area which is in contact with oxygen rich environment. Clear? So if we take example of human beings, so the air goes through nose. We will discuss that in detail also. So air goes through nose and reaches to lungs. Clear? And that structure is formed in such a way, this whole respiratory system is formed in such a way that the main purpose of that is to increase the surface area so that more and more oxygen can go in and more and more carbon dioxide can move out. Clear? And that area has to be very delicate and very fine. Okay, means it should be of one cell thick only. Then only that exchange of gases can take place. Okay. Now, if we study the respiratory system in human beings, so if we study their structure, so how it is? So, like outside the two nostrils, clear? And these nostrils, they have fine hairs. What are the role of these hair is to filter whatever air comes in. So whatever dust particles are there, so it filters them. This hair filters all those things. Clear? So these nostrils, then this is a nasal passage. Okay? And below this is a mouth. That is the part of digestive system that we have studied. Right? And this nasal passage, right, comes to this throat area, and there is a one area where it's a tube-like structure where esophagus and the trachea. So this is the area which is behind the mouth, right, and behind the nasal cavity. So both opens in this area, right. So this is called pharynx. See, so it is a part of throat behind the mouth, right? Behind the mouth and this nasal cavity. And it is above the esophagus. Esophagus is behind this trachea. So above the esophagus, this is the area which is called the pharynx. Clear? And it carries food and air. Okay? So food goes to esophagus and air goes to the trachea. Clear? And then this air goes from to the trachea through this. There is a structure called larynx. Between the pharynx and trachea, there is a structure called larynx. It's a box-like structure. It's a larynx. We call it a voice box also. Right? So from nasal cavity, air goes to pharynx, right? And through pharynx, it goes to larynx. And between pharynx and larynx, there is a structure called epiglottis. It's a flap of cartilage which closes this larynx and opens it. Clear? So why closes and opens it? See, when the food is moves, so food that time it closes this larynx area so that no food can enter into this respiratory tract, and it goes to mouth, or so it goes to esophagus, from mouth to esophagus. Clear? So between this pharynx and larynx means, or you can say on top of this larynx there is an epiglottis. It's a flap of cartilage which closes this area and it opens it, and when air has to pass in, it opens that particular, so that air can enter into larynx. Clear? So it works like this. And this pharynx, it's a hollow tube. It allows the passage of air from pharynx to trachea, right? And it contains vocal cords also, which vibrate, and so that we can speak. It's called the voice box. Larynx is called voice box also, right? And after that there is a trachea, right? It is called windpipe also, and it is ahead of this. Behind this is the esophagus, that is food pipe. And this trachea, it is covered by these cartilages. It's a C-shaped. C-shaped means behind that esophagus, so it should not hurt the esophagus. It's a C-shaped cartilages covers this trachea. And what is the role of these C-shaped cartilage? Is so that this passage should not collapse, right? So this is trachea. Now this trachea divides into two bronchi. Clear? Which goes, one goes to right one and another goes to left lungs. And the bronchi divides further into bronchioles. Right? And at the end, the division is again the division is too much. Like they divide many times, right? And at the end of each this tubes or bronchiole, there are alveolar sac. It is nothing but a membrane like structure, very fine, very delicate, and they are only single cell thick. Clear? And these alveolar sac, their walls are surrounded by blood vessels or capillaries. So thick network of capillaries are there, so that gaseous exchange can take place. So this is about the structure of human respiratory system. And below there is a diaphragm, right? So its role is this diaphragm's role is in the taking in air and releasing out air. So how it does, we'll discuss that also. Okay. So how this air enters, clear, and moves out. So what happens during this? So if we see the structure is that these are the lungs and it is surrounded by these ribs. Yeah, so ribs cage. It is in the ribs cage, and below there is a diaphragm. Right? So what happens when during breathing, when we take air in, what happens during that time? These ribs cage, they moves upward. Clear? And this diaphragm, it flattens. So both these processes increase this surface, increase this cavity, and so this air gush into this lungs. Clear? So this is called the chest cavity. So when we take air in, that time these ribs, they goes up, and this diaphragm flattens, which increases this cavity, area of this cavity, so which takes this air in. Clear? And when this air comes in, then at alveolar sac that we have studied here, so now here is oxygen, right, or air is there. Clear? And blood brings carbon dioxide from all over the body, so that blood is richly supplied with carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide goes here in the alveolar sac and oxygen goes into the blood. Clear? And there's an oxygen. Now what happens? This CO2 has to move out from these alveolar sacs. So that time these ribs, they comes down, and this diaphragm, it takes this shape, which increases this or decreases this chest cavity, and this air or carbon dioxide moves out of the lungs. Clear? So I hope this process is clear to you, right? So if we study one alveolar sac, or that we call alveolus, so this is one alveolus. Clear? And it's a wall which is richly supplied with blood vessels and capillaries, right? So that blood brings carbon dioxide from all over the body, right? And here there is a oxygen. Air brings oxygen, so oxygen goes into these walls, these blood, and carbon dioxide moves into this area, organ in the alveolus, right? And it moves out of the lungs. And how these ribs comes down, diaphragm flattens, and it moves the air out of the body or out of the lungs, right? Now when we just for this exchange of gases, sometimes time is required. So you see, when we take in and when we breathe out, when we breathe in, so that time it is really a fast process. It is not very slow process. So just that exchange of gases should happen, right? There is always a residual volume, that is always some air remain in these alveolus or in lungs or in these alveolar sac, so that exchange of gases can take place. It is not that once air in, it moves quickly, it comes in quickly, it moves out, but it is not that whole air moves out of the lungs. There are always air left in these alveolar sac. Okay? So lungs always contain some volume of air. So there is a sufficient time for oxygen to absorb and carbon dioxide to release, and that volume we call residual volume. So I hope this residual volume is clear to you all. Now in case of, if you see if human body is also a large body, there we have even more bigger animals also. So this exchange of gases, right? So like this is a diffusion process. It's a diffusion. Oxygen is taken in and carbon dioxide is moved out. Because why it is happening here? Oxygen is coming because in blood CO2 is more, right? And here in alveolus CO2 is less. So that is a difference in pressure. So because of that difference in pressure, here in blood pressure is more, in alveolus pressure of carbon dioxide is less, so CO2 moved from blood to alveolus. And opposite happened with the carbon dioxide. In air, carbon dioxide pressure is more, and in blood oxygen pressure is less. Clear? So oxygen pressure is more in alveolus, oxygen pressure is less in blood. So this oxygen moves from this area, from alveolus to blood, because we are using oxygen in the body. So their pressure is less in blood. So because of this difference in diffusion pressure or partial pressure also we call it, this exchange of gases takes place, right? But this process is not sufficient enough for like exchange of gases. We need some more, because we need more exchange, more of gases, more of carbon, oxygen to the body, right? This only won't help our requirement, right? So in case of large body size animals, so this process occurs, that it is there, but what extra they have, they in blood there are respiratory pigments are also there. Clear? So these pigments, so the pigments, like if we talk about human beings, we know, everybody knows about hemoglobin, right? So hemoglobin present in blood, right? So they have strong affinity for oxygen, right? So they take this oxygen and bind with themselves. So oxygen bind to hemoglobin and moves. See, right? So respiratory pigments take up oxygen from air in the lungs and carries to tissues. So hemoglobin, it binds with oxygen, it carries to the tissue. Yeah? But exchange of carbon dioxide is through the process, through diffusion process only that we discussed, like because of difference in partial pressure, because carbon dioxide is soluble in plasma, so it is can easily, but for oxygen, pigments are there in large size body animals. So in human beings, this respiratory pigment is hemoglobin, right, which has high affinity for oxygen, right? And where it is present in blood, it is in RBC, right? So in RBC, hemoglobin is present, it binds with it. And CO2 is more soluble in water, and oxygen is not that much soluble in water. So oxygen transported in dissolved form in our blood. So it dissolved in the plasma and moves. Clear? So this is about this respiration in terrestrial organisms, and one next topic we'll do in next video. So I hope this is clear to you all. Thank you, students. Thank you so much.